agenda was really, really good.
Sorry, they're going to run over.
Yeah, I know. So just to prepare everyone as well, we'll use the time as we can. So welcome to this first SIEE roundtable, roundtable 1. So the most important one. So today we're going to look at benchmarking. Before we jump into this, the most important thing, Jens from BASF co-presenting with me today. Jens, you have to say, what's your favourite film?
Oh, I was thinking a bit about it, and at the end of the day, I remembered a bit on Christmas, and I have actually 2. So when you are at Christmas time, what I always look at is Die Hard. So unfortunately, Bruce Willis, but the other one is in German Schönebecherung, which is Christmas Vacation. So actually, I have 2
favourite films.
But Die Hard is definitely the first one.
Okay. So I didn't get asked that question. I'm going to be talking to Paul about this afterwards. Why we like it. But it's really easy. So my favourite film is Jaws. The reason is because it was made the same year that I was born. So you can work out how old I am if you look it up on the internet. Anyway, benchmarking. So you've heard it so many times today. Okay, so first, we're not going to be talking about AI within this session. We're really not. And of course, we have to be very, very careful, because if we use it too much, then Skynet will prevail. Terminator is my second favourite. Having said that, I do want to say one thing about AI, and I think this is the best practical application of ChatGPT that we've had. And a few gentlemen who are quite relevant to the current political or socio-economic situations. I didn't want to be focusing just on America, so I've included the UK's very, very fortuitous and industrious leader, Keir Starmer. Believe me, that's a very, very clear representation of him. We can also see it that it's actually in our world under different roles that we see, but it's actually quite difficult to find ChatGPT action figures of scientists, especially if you say formulation chemists or something like this. You get nothing. But I did find these 3. This one was my favourite one, the project manager with the PMI cut, which everyone seems to have if you're a project manager. Okay, why are we here? So who's in this position? Who's in this room? And you don't know what benchmarking is, but now you're too far in. You can't go out the door now. You're too afraid to ask. I'm sure everyone has an idea of this, but we're going to see what those ideas are. So you've already used Mentimeter today to start answering questions. We're going to be doing quite a lot of that in here to see what's going on. See what the opinion of the room is, and we're going to discuss, okay? I'm really, really curious, as should all of you be, what this can mean to everybody. So, I would like you to use your phones, please, and scan the QR code, and then I will open up the poll. So when everyone's got the QR code, okay. Oh, it's still there. Yeah? Okay. So, there should be a question, hopefully, that comes up, which is, what does benchmarking mean to you? Now, this is a free text answer. There are no pre-configured what benchmarking is. You can answer with one word, you can type in a few words, it's entirely up to you. But if you could give a few thoughts, an idea, a collection of words, whatever you think, what does benchmarking mean to you? And we're starting to see some answers pop up. It's real time, so these will start to come. Excellent. So we're nearly everybody answered. However, we're already starting to see some trends and some similarities here. So keywords: compare, measure, learn, innovate, competitors, others, peers. There's some collection of words here that are coming together. And as always, when you do something like this, there is no right answer. There's many, many answers that actually give us the context of what benchmarking is. So if you actually look at the AI-generated description of benchmarking, it has all of these terms in it. Okay, so it's the method by which you gather information, you review information, you compare against your peers, your competitors, other industries, similar industries, and you're able to then look for areas of potential improvement, process changes, optimizations. That's essentially the definition, as per Google AI, for benchmarking. But it's super broad. Okay, so it means many, many different things to different people. We've already seen this. So if we look at the next question, so here's a multiple choice for you. So what can benchmarking give us, and why is it important at all? And I will caveat this question to say I know there's other reasons why it can be important, and it can give us other things, but just in the interest of this exercise, where do people think that benchmarking can provide input, insight, and become important for us? So starting to come in, and we've got a very, very high bias towards the left side of the chart. So again, pretty much there in terms of responses. So overwhelmingly, it gives us a good indication of the current status within my organisation. Now, Jens and I were talking earlier on in the first coffee break about anchors and hooks into earlier talks that were done today. And we've got a couple of the speakers in here who presented today. One thing that came across many, many times was being able to show, articulate, confirm value or benefits provided to your organisation through the execution of a project or a programme. So very quickly, what's the first thing you need to do to be able to show value? What have you got to do before you can show any value? Any initial thoughts or ideas?
Relying on what we mean by value.
Yeah. So absolutely, the value is a subjective or a very, very open statement. So yes, we need to know what that means for us and our organisation individually, as a department, as a company. But the other thing that we need to make sure that we do is we have to understand our starting point. Okay? Otherwise, value is subjective. Someone could say we're better. And then the question is, how are we better? Prove to me that we're better. How do you know that we're better? And if you don't have the starting point, you cannot categorically say that you are better. So it gives a good indication of our current state, absolutely. Benchmarking is vital to be able to confirm our current state and that it's not just anecdotal.
And then maybe to add, I think whether we was aware of it or not, I think by listening to all the speakers today, we already did benchmarking. So I think everyone who was listening to the speech immediately was comparing, okay, what I'm doing, what is my organization doing? I think we already applied that while it was just listening to all of the speakers.
Definitely, definitely. I think it's an ongoing learning for everybody, and I think this links into the second spike, if you like, which is planning benchmarking, hearing about it, thinking about it, allows us to think a little bit more intelligently about our organisation. We start to have to compartmentalise, we start to have to structure. Okay, maybe as Sandra says, what's value? We have an initial thought about what value we would like to deliver or what we would like to achieve, that actually as we start to break this out and go through this exercise, that becomes something very, very different. Interestingly, will it tell me what to do? It can start to indicate what you could do. Prescriptive benchmarking, maybe we're not there yet, but we'll see some information maybe later on that. It can be very, very.
Just checking everything's all right.
It's all good, Paul, thanks. It can be very, very broad. We can benchmark a very, very broad topic, but we can use benchmarking for something super specific. We could benchmark a process, or we could benchmark an entire operating unit within our organisation. Okay, so we can choose how to use it. Next question for you. Who is benchmarking useful for? And again, I know that this doesn't show every single persona within the organisation. There is methods to asking this question.
No, people get biased.
Couple more seconds, but I think we know what we can see here. Okay, so who's benchmarking important for? And you know, rightly, if used in an appropriate way, the tool or the process, the mechanism is useful for everybody. Okay, benchmarking is not something that is traditionally used for or applicable only to one area. You know, there's some things where you might turn around and say this is only good for our finance group, or for HR, or for our facilities management. Benchmarking is for everybody. Okay, it might be invoked by a certain audience, but actually in terms of what the output and the usefulness can be, it's super widely applicable. And in fact, this question was sort of prompted when Jens and I were preparing for this session. Maybe Jens, you want to sort of elaborate, but it was that your opinion, and then you immediately said that there was also other opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we started that discussion last year when we had the CUP meeting, so in Heidelberg. So we were thinking, okay, what is that topic about? And meanwhile, also in BASF, this topic becomes more and more interesting. So our leaders, so everyone was saying, okay, how can we compare? How can we benchmark each other? And then when I talked to my senior management, of course, he was immediately looking on the costs. So he said, hey, where can I save costs? Can we optimize something? And I think if I would ask you, who got the question on cost savings this year once, I think most of you would raise hands. If I look on my side, being on the very operational aspect, I said, okay, I'm more, what can I do for my users? Not necessarily it's more cost efficient, but maybe I can do better service for them. So, and that's why, depending on whom you ask, the outcome of that benchmark and the question behind could be very different.
Absolutely, and I think this is the very interesting thing. I think as well, if we obtain information through any kind of benchmarking activity, it's also interpreted or useful for in very different ways for different audiences, the same data set. So it will potentially say something very different to people within operations, to people who are within the execution at the lab level, for example, versus people who are in the leadership positions. So again, the outcome, or what we actually end up using the information for, will be different based on our audience. So it is widely applicable. This is tooling that can be used everywhere. Another question, a few more options here. What could benchmarking show me? Series, again, there's no right or wrong answers, just a series of pieces of information. Starting to think about, you know, what could it mean for you? What could it mean for your organisation? What could it mean for your leaders or people who are within your groups? pretty much there. Okay, this is an interesting spread that we've got here now. So, what's initially nice and what sort of stands out is that there is a series of different outcomes or observations that can come from this kind of thing, and it could be used for everything within a single exercise, or you could start to focus or zero in on a particular area that's interesting for you. So Jens, I think you mentioned after Heidelberg and one of the sort of upper management or senior management interests and requests was specifically in and around this area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
And no, I'm just wondering because the prioritized action, I'm a bit surprised because I think in the earlier ones, I think there was the question about can tell us what to do. That's interesting. So I was thinking that this probably is a bit lower, but
maybe as it starts to come into with all the other context that's sort of being described. But I would say these two here, you know, they're well, and the first one, the highest. Absolutely, these are things that people will want to see, and I think more and more people are wanting to see not necessarily how they compare within their own organisations, but how they're comparing or aligning with other organisations. And interestingly, I think this was a case for BASF, Jens, is it's not just their own industry sector, but also cross-industry.
Cross-industry, yeah. Especially learning from, we are mostly doing chemicals, yeah. But what is pharma is doing? So is there any overlap, especially when it comes to operations? So there might be things we are not looking at all at the moment. Yeah, I think that's part of it. So.
Quick question, which is an ad hoc question. So this is for who is awake and who can still remember. Can everybody remember Suchi's presentation from this morning, the very first presentation? And she showed the sort of digital maturity across sectors. And we had, whatever it was, technical leaders, which I guess was the ChatGPT AI characters that I showed, versus public sector at the other end. Who was surprised where life sciences and research and development sat within that chart? Was anyone, you were surprised? Were you expecting it to be more mature?
Yes.
Yeah. Any sort of reasons why, or?
Well, we always say that life science is ahead of chemicals, and so they were in general a bit politically right.
Yeah. Anybody else surprised or not surprised? You shaking your head.
The analogy I always use is we make space-age drugs. We use technology that they built the pyramids with. You know, people love writing things on pieces of paper, and the disconnect seems so strange to me at times.
Yes.
I'm not sure if the picture that we saw it is really the truth, in the sense that this potentially show the adoption of AI. The more you go on the right side, you see less compliance expectations. You have life science, you have a bank, and later on you have the others. And one of the constraints in life science is about compliance. That's stopping a lot, and quality. So.
And I think it was referenced as well in one of the talks. Maybe it was the Roche talk, where it was saying that there was the compliance hurdle to overcome, which is, I guess, you can kind of see it in two ways. Sometimes compliance is the blocker towards technology adoption. Sometimes it's the accelerator. So sometimes the compliance authorities, bodies will say, you have to now submit this in a digital format that matches this. And if you don't, you won't get your approval. That can accelerate digital adoption. But you're right, in terms of if there's no sort of big step like that, it can happen. I will throw out a sort of semi-contentious statement around that, which is, I do think though that sometimes people hide behind compliance as a reason to stop change, which I know has been seen. Please.
Yeah, I think it's also difficult to compare, right? I mean, big tech, they work with a lot of data and accuracy doesn't matter at all, right? So you use different technology. In banking, you have a very simple data model, right? In life science, we have very diverse data, And accuracy with little data is very different than in other sectors. So I think that's why you need to look at it differently. I think it's not easy to compare this across.
Or you nail down your scope, yeah, and I think that's what we also then will see tomorrow in the further discussion. So I think if you're getting more complex, I think then you should narrow down your scope, yeah, what exactly you put on a benchmark. So because only if you then limit that scope, you can probably get some results out of it, yeah, but you can't take that one and take that to a complete different area and say that probably they're the same. No, it's probably not. So you should think about another approach in that environment and just execute whatever is needed on that end. And I think regulations very often give you boundaries in which you cannot move that much, and that also means there is less room for benchmarking or comparison.
Take the example of the classic marketing analysis that you can do also in life science, that absolutely is not validated as a software, versus a research application that is that must be validated, takes 30% more time and cost and so on.
I think this one as well is quite interesting to see that sometimes people think that benchmarking is based on things that you do know. You know, you're looking at a specific process. You're saying, oh, we need to confirm that this is the case. But actually, it's the things that you don't necessarily think you're going to see, the surprises that can actually give you the biggest impact. So again, I think the spread is really quite telling in terms of what it could show you.
But to your last point, isn't that the reason to start benchmarking, and then the outcome is your answer?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it can be, as Jens saying, if the scope is super nailed down, you're really using it to confirm a hypothesis. But generally speaking, you might be in a position where there are dozens of potentials or answers or possibilities, and what you're trying to do is to try to get a read on that. Absolutely. So, next question. LIMS, ELN or other informatics system, if you just consider any platform application that you've been involved in, quick question here around the level of configuration that's been applied. Now, you don't have to be super accurate. This is can be just a gut feeling, and again, it's just an indicator. But interestingly, and this wasn't planned, this was something that was talked about just before the coffee break, where customization was sort of recommended. Trying to stay out of the box. BASF mentioned it with regards to the highly contentious Excel discussion, but it was also talked about in Freddie's talk around the Microsoft proposition, and it was also referenced in Andreas's change management conversation as well. So this is actually a specific question in and around the area that Jens is also going to talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But understanding whether people are working with a vanilla system or platform versus one that's been highly adapted definitely changes the questions that we want to look at, the areas that we want to focus on, because someone who's benchmarking an incredibly customized platform is going to come out probably with some very, very different conclusions and thoughts around one that has been stuck to as much as possible out of the box. And I think you referenced something around this as well, Jens, in terms of different industries.
And if I look to that picture and that results are not necessarily two different industries, I would say that the next level of benchmarking here would be, because in BASF we divided our laboratories from R&D labs to support laboratories, to platform labs, and then the QC laboratories, so which are very close to production. And all of them have a different demand. And I'm just wondering, depending on the type of lab we are supporting, what strategy you apply. So for example, if you go to a QC lab, probably that second answer is the one which fits. As closer you go to R&D, that's maybe where those steps in. But to really understand that, what other pairs are able to do instead of you, maybe you get surprised if you start a benchmarking and see, hey, someone in the R&D lab did this. I would be very curious and let's say, hey, how did you do that? So what is different to what I'm doing and how you achieve that? So I think that's also then another level of understanding what others do, what you haven't seen before. I think that's the part where you say, this is things I don't know before. And yeah, I would not look into different industries here. So the first thing I had in mind was the different lab types we are supporting.
And I think this goes back to that previous question where it says, as you said, Jens, shows me things I didn't know.
Yeah.
So if you are able to see things that you didn't necessarily know or you thought weren't happening, you can then go into the follow-up. And this is, of course, the next thing, and it was mentioned in many talks today, not specifically around benchmarking, is this standing still, kind of we're done. I think all of us have been involved in things that are never really done. I'm maturing and getting older, so things that weren't important when I was in my 20s are now important, like gardening and looking after my house and things like this. But you could consider a LIMS implementation like having a garden. Okay, so you can set it all up through a huge amount of effort with design and planning, and you have this lovely garden, and you like sitting there, and then you have kids, and suddenly that garden doesn't work anymore. You've got to put a football pitch in and a basketball hoop and toys everywhere. And then they get a bit older and they start going out to the pub, so then you need to get rid of the toys. Or you can just leave it all and it just starts to die and no one uses the garden anymore, so no user adoption. So what do we have to do? We have to continuously maintain and evolve our garden. That's our LIMS and ELN. I've just thought of a new talk title that I could maybe start to evolve and develop. Is your LIMS a garden? But we may even start in a particular area in and around our deployment, in and around our ideal thought process in terms of what we would like to implement. And then it was said in one of the earlier talks, the question was asked actually to Arginex. You've kind of gone down this path. How would you reevaluate? How would you go to the next stage? What would you do next? It could be this question. We've thought that the ideal scenario was this, to get every single piece of capability that we wanted to satisfy our end users. But actually the cost of doing that versus the value that's been obtained by doing all of these customizations actually mean you should try and sit here if you can.
And I think it's also changing. So if I would have answered that question for BASF maybe 10, 15 years ago, bespoke. So we just recently replaced 2 applications, both 25 years old, bespokes, tailor-made, LIMS, so programmed by people who are now close to retire, and a lot of things has changed now towards standard vendors applications, but it's very hard to get there. I think we all know.
Definitely. Is anyone surprised by this? Is it what you were expecting? Yeah.
Where is out of the box?
Yeah.
working?
Who's
That's
brave enough to
interesting,
put their
so-
hand up to say out of the box?
If not, also okay, but
There's no wrong
Lots of
answer.
people are
here.
trying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is that again, apologies for referencing things that have already been said today, but there were 2 different organisations that both said this morning that the top-down mandate, and one was BASF, was that you're starting to look at just good enough, or is it able to provide and fulfil certain capabilities rather than trying to go for absolutely everything, every single requirement, And there are trade-offs between delivering everything and time to value, speed, demonstrating that things are happening. I think you were talking about being able to demonstrate change and value and impact as well as quickly as possible. If you're going for this full, bespoke, vendor-defined capability change, like you were saying, Jens, that was happening 15, 20 years ago, the time to value is probably going to be very, very long. Whereas if you're more at the top end, you may be able to show increased time to value.
And now while you're talking about that, I'm just curious and wondering, because if we would have that discussion about benchmarking and share with, I know that BASF, we are sharing a lot of one-to-one with some companies, so on individual level, not in broader benchmarking activities. If we would have done that exercise probably earlier, because when we made the decision to go with one ELJ for entire BASF, this approach, we coming from that approach.
Yeah.
So within BASF, it was bespoke. We have almost 100 LIMS systems. It's not, I'm not kidding, so that's really a lot. So BASF is quite large, but it's a huge number. But if you come from there and you see how that was not working at all, and you have no comparison, you probably think the truth is somewhere here. And I think now, 10 years, 15 years later, we see probably the truth is somewhere in between.
And that again, that was another comment that was made, is the landscape changes, things evolve, so this will be different in a few years' time, I'm sure.
If I may, I think we may want to look at it from a different perspective as well, because I mean, trying to go after only one single standardized LIMS CLN strategy is probably not the right way to look at it, because you're going to force user to adopt a kind of user journey, which they may not be in. So the approach that we were looking at is, instead of trying to standardize the front end, we want to standardize the back end. We want to standardize the data model. We want to go after data products that enable us to create the bespoke application. But that's a different strategy.
And this is absolutely, Sandra, and I think this is still thinking, and indeed because it has LIMS and ELN written on the slide, this still has an application-centric thought to it, as opposed to the data-centric thought. And absolutely, you could benchmark both from an application-centric viewpoint and from a data-centric viewpoint. And in fact, that could maybe even show something super interesting where you're going, so if we're thinking of it coming from this direction, do we get different answers and viewpoints and thoughts as if we're coming from the data-centric side? Absolutely.
And also how quickly you can adapt, I think we also see that makes a huge difference whether you come from greenfield, or whether you come from brownfield. I think that makes them, there's a lot of angles you need to look at it.
Yeah, definitely. So, there's one more Menti here, which is where you just answered in and around that platform. Do you believe that value has been brought by that as categorized by these? And again, lots of other ways and points that could show value, but just starting to bring some thoughts together around whether or not things have actually delivered in and around previous expectations.
One choice, one name, just for the context.
Yes. On purpose, Gabriel.
I know.
It would become too granular if it became trying to decrypt it in the session. I know in the survey it's not. I took some artistic liberty.
Nobody's put red yet, which is really interesting.
That's true. They haven't. Okay, so some more may start to come in, but again, this is, I think, quite difficult to answer, depending on where you're at in your journey. Interesting that the highest, or one of the highest, is because the system is obviously in its infancy. It's quite difficult to show exactly what's happened. What was it that was said? A 5-year LIMS, Andreas was talking about a 5-year LIMS implementation project. So maybe if you're only 4 years in, you can't yet show what value you're at. But if we look at areas that we we sort of say yes versus no, there are organisations that can say that they have demonstrated things like operational efficiency, time savings, cost savings, but that's not necessarily the objective of what the programme was about. You know, so you said it, Sandra, first off, you know, what is the value, what's our definition of it in this particular context? So the question itself is relatively abstract unless you know exactly what that is. Because again, someone could have said, yes, we have delivered value. Our users are happy. Are they really? You know, or our users are able to do their job better. What's the one that we always hear? They've got more time for science. What does that mean? What does it really mean? My question is, are they doing better science? You know, if they're able to do better science because of tooling that's being provided to them, then that's a step change, that's a transformation. It's not necessarily that they've been given time back. Of course, in certain areas such as manufacturing, cost saving is actually material and can be measured and can be viewed. You know, do we have less failures? Do we have less batch recalls? Do we have less product recalls? Are we able to get products to the customer faster? You know, those have a materialistic financial measurable against them. But LIMS and ELNs aren't just used in QC, they're used everywhere. So being able to understand what domain you're coming from, to your point, Jens, around the level of customization, this is also probably tied into the area that you're looking at.
Absolutely, and I think here also, again, the level of detail will matter, because here in this question, I think it's very important, when do you ask? Is it day one after go live? Is that you've just finished your product or your project? It's just a week old, a month old, maybe even a year old. You ask that question, or whether it's 5 years old, 10 years old, people went through the change process, and now that a system they've not used that often, it's now the beloved system, and if you take that away, you probably have a big problem. And I think that was also one of the things I was thinking when we were talking about value. I think very often we look in the same context to value when initiating the project, having the business case exactly right after the project. Yes, some people look on the total cost of ownership, 5 years, maybe more. But a lot of systems, I think at the end, if they are getting really old, if you would repeat that question, you probably get a complete different answer. So I think for that question, it really matters what is the timing, where are you in your product life cycle, and how that will influence that answer.
Absolutely. So with that piece of additional information, so these last two questions are actually part of a broader survey where information is being collected in and around a benchmarking activity. It's actually something that Jens is very, very heavily involved in. So Jens, if you could share a few sort of thoughts or pieces of information for the audience around that.
Of course. And first of all, thank you also for the Zifo colleagues who jointly with us was working on the survey, because out of that loose discussion we had last year, and with the interest on our management to do a little bit more on this benchmarking activities, we said, okay, let's try to get it more precise. The environment we are working on is quite complex. I can ask about digitalization in labs. I can ask about specific implementation like a LIMS or an ELJ. So we came to that point and said, hey, to get the best probable answer, let's try to nail it down to a very specific environment, ELN and LIMS, and try to understand from our perspective at BASF, if we look at that, we are done with the implementation, we are now getting in a more stable status, and if we want to improve, what are the questions how we would measure for us, and that's very egoistic thinking in this case. And tomorrow we will talk about that a little bit in more detail, and we also want to invite people to share their opinion to see what else could we do differently, knowing that it still needs to be specific to get results out of that. And that's why we put a survey together where we look from different angles to aspects where we think that matters. If we change something here, that could impact operations, it could impact our hardware, it could impact the way how we work with our vendors. And that's why we came together. So we were thinking about these elements, and we come up with some questionnaires. I think at the end of the day, it's a thin line to go to the dark side. I think we talked about Star Wars. Star Wars. Sorry for that. Yeah, it's very thin line to go to the dark side. To be too specific, you need then multiple people in the organization to get an answer to that, and maybe it's also not any more realistic. So that's why we tried up to come with good questions, where at the end of the day, if we run that survey, and Zifo will then share and aggregate all the results and make it available to the community, that each and everyone who's looking at that will say, oh, okay, somewhere I'm here. Oh, that's something new I haven't seen so far. So you saw some of the aspects we already talked about, you will then find in the survey. And yeah, my pleasure is to invite you all to join. Yeah, let's see what the outcome is, and maybe also discover, because like I said, it's a very specific view in one area. You might have multiple areas. You may want to deep dive into one specific aspect. Yeah, maybe also in a future meeting here. I think there's a lot of potential to see where our joint interests are and where we want to have further discussions.
Absolutely.
Please feel free to involve yourself and get connected here.
Absolutely, and I think the thing that was really nice around this was, I know some people were here in Basel last year, and a lot of new faces as well, is it's wonderful when everyone comes together and talks and you listen and you exchange and you share. It's fantastic, and it's probably the biggest thing that an event like this brings. But the other thing that maybe doesn't happen so frequently, and not just for a Zifo event, but just in general, you go to Future Labs Live or you go to Lab of the Future, you come away with 2 or 3 water bottles from different vendors, or some sweets, but you don't always come away with anything more than thinking, that was really good in that presentation, I really enjoyed that was nice. What's really impactful is if you come away with something that you can potentially use after the event. So we've been thinking long and hard and sort of seeing what can be provided from, what can Zifo facilitate to try and help with that. So this is one area where this can happen. You know, this isn't just one person saying something. We're trying to collect multiple voices to be able to start to see if there's thoughts, trends, ideas that everybody can use constructively. And then as Jens says, maybe that leads to a different path to be able to ask for more information.
Yeah. And I think the nice thing is it's a data set from us. It's not a data set from a vendor, because if I look back to comparison, like it's an RFP. Yeah? So let's imagine we do an RFP with certain vendors. At the end of the day, we also generate some knowledge, and we can compare certain solutions. But all of that are answers from the vendors. So, and of course, at the end, in the project implementation, we will all learn that's slightly different and so on. I think with these kind of surveys or getting together on that one, it's our data set. So at the end of the day, it's also interesting to see how industry is thinking about those topics, irrespectively if it's a vendor or not. Yeah, so very interesting to see.
So there's, I will just show you. This is the other one, yeah, exactly. So for those who like the play on words, I do like a meme, so yes, a shameless plug. This QR code here is for a survey that's been promoted. If you've seen a QR code here and there and everywhere during the course of the day, and it's also the one that Gabrielle and Andy and Mehdi were walking around with the iPads. In a similar vein to what Jens was just saying, this is again an exercise in collecting thoughts, information from the industry to be able to confirm or deny or see new areas that are of interest, that are important, that allow people to focus in the right areas. Because I think this is another thing in and around benchmarking is we can look at something quite broad or we can define the scope, but if the more information that we find, it allows us to then actually focus in on the areas that can potentially bring impact. That's the ultimate aim. From Jens's perspective, it was saving money from the upper management.
That's a different story. But I think since you will collect that data at the end of the day, and we do not know exactly who has answered what, I think at the end of the day, like with the Mentimeter today, we can also think about where do we want to unbox something.
Yep.
Is there any question where at the end of the day, in a roundtable discussion like that, we want to go deeper and really unbox that topic and see what is behind that scene. Yeah. So for me, it's a starting point. I'm really not knowing where we end up with that. Of course, there is a specific interest on our side, but I think there was a lot of people who shared that interest. Otherwise, we would not go that direction. So, yeah.
And I think what Jens was just saying there is that it's the start, and then you start to be able to talk about areas that are of interest. So at the end of last year, I was at an event where we were talking about, moving data between different organisations in the context of acquisitions, mergers, divestitures, licensing. And it was quite fortuitous. So it was a Pistoia event, Pistoia Alliance, and the Pistoia Alliance had released the results of one of their surveys a few weeks before. And I was able to use a few pieces of information from the survey that were relevant to the talk. But actually what it did, as per your comment, Jens, is it then prompted other thoughts. For anyone who's interested, I can show you that particular piece of information. But what was super interesting, because it was in and around data readiness, being able to say what the blockers were around your sort of data and digitisation progression through your organisation. And I paraphrased the question, but it was, what is the biggest blocker to your organisation becoming data ready? And answer number 2 was that there are no clear definitions or standards in and around data governance. That was the second answer across whatever it was, 90 organisations, to say that's what their blocker was. So as opposed to saying, as you were saying, Sandra, is starting with a data foundation, that was still the problem, because what had actually happened is they had gone however far down from an application-centric perspective, and now the whole disparity of data, no standardization, having to try and bring it all together, that was their biggest blocker. So, but you would think from talking with everybody before that, that wasn't a problem, but it was the biggest problem. So yes, it will definitely highlight some scenarios that are of interest. So with that, we will also share the link for the LIM survey for anyone who has not completed it. And the next step will be to share information as it starts to come out and interesting observations start to appear. And we always welcome feedback and input in and around it as well. So, Gabrielle, I know you've been involved in the LIM survey a lot as well. Was there anything else you wanted to add on top of it?
No, I just wanted to clarify, because it is true that you do see one QR code here and we are talking about another survey. So yes, there are 2 surveys that we are running in parallel, I would say. This one is a quite short one, based really on data capabilities. So we are really analyzing the 4 different components of data management that we think need to be investigated. So please feel free to continue coming to me after this meeting to go and get the answers. We can do it quite quickly. And by the way, we have made sure that there are some specific examples in order to make sure that the people can really answer it and really can feel comfortable putting an assessment of where they stand. And here we are talking about another survey that has not yet been fully publicized. That might require maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes of your time. So I guess the best way to do it would be that you give a bit of this time to a Zifo consultant who would come and do it with you. That would be, to be very, very honest, the best way to also ensure that we get the best quality data. So that's basically how we are approaching this LIMS survey.
Yeah.
Can I ask a selfish question?
Of course.
I unfortunately cannot join tomorrow, but I would be interested in, or organization from Lanza would be interested in how, with LIMS and ELN and any digital systems, there are two things you can measure. One is operational efficiency, cost, money, and all of that. But the other is disruptive innovation. And that's much harder to measure. So I would be very curious in knowing which of these technologies actually even enable you to do disruptive innovation that would end up increasing your, let's say, revenue offering, whatever. That then doesn't mean you need to save cost, you're just adding more revenue. And that is also another way to create the difference between what you earn and what you spend, right? So I don't know if that's part of the survey, but I would be very
No,
interested.
definitely not.
Okay.
No, that would go a little bit beyond what we are looking for.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Maybe
But like I
next
said,
time.
I think that it's not
something.
yeah, it's already quite a lot. But at the end of the day, like I said, there is probably something missing, and let's see what it is. And
I think as Jens was saying as well, is it's a starting point. It's definitely going to trigger more areas to then look in more detail at. But actually, what you were just asking there, so there's a large top 20 pharmaceutical organisation in the UK who I work with who were involved in COVID vaccines. You can deduce who it is. So they A to Z. They had a very, very bold and ambitious CEO statement 7-8 months ago, and the objective is huge, but it's actually in and around what you're saying. It's not just a case of we need to have some operational efficiencies. In order to meet what's been stated to the market, they have to deliver on multiple fronts. So this goes back into that, what is the value that has to be delivered? It's not just the value of saving money on materials or reagents or being able to get 1 hour back per scientist per week, per department. It's we have to change the way that we work, we have to innovate, we have to be different. So actually value definitions, business value definitions that are going into business cases that were being talked about this morning are not in and around operational efficiencies. They're actually in and around how can this group, how can this modality, how can the entire organisation actually change, transform to meet the objectives that have been set by the CEO.
Yeah, it would be very interesting.
if we would end up with all the questions, I think we would have in that room, that's maybe 100 plus question survey. But if you want to try to slice it in a way, which is in a meaningful way, I think we tried our best. Let's say it like that, to have a starting point, to say, okay, how can we get into that topic? And I think based on the results, we will see how further we can bring that. Is there any area, like I said, where we want to go in another direction, or like I said, maybe there is a complete different view. For example, if I looked at that, and that's maybe the colleague is not here, so the lady, so I talked to her, I said tomorrow when I show some more insights from BASF here, when I look to our cost distribution, for example, license cost is something I don't really care a lot about, because this is, for us, this is the minor part of the entire operational cost. For that person, it was high impact. By reducing the license costs, you were able to save a couple of 100Ks. And that was interesting, because for me, that was nothing I would look at. For her, it was the completely opposite. So I think if we go through that discussion, I think we will discover a lot where we see 80-20 or 50-50, where we have a common understanding, but there will be also plenty of areas where I think we are thinking completely different. So, but we need to start somewhere, and that's the try to get started.
Good enough, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts or comments? Everyone need their last shot of caffeine before the day starts to get closed.
True.
Well, thank you very much for your participation and attendance. And as said, we'll start to share some information already from this session with everybody. And then as we get more data, we'll start to share. And we really want to draw on the community to help make it as rich as possible. So thanks already for participating today, and looking forward to it continuing.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.